Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is September 7, 2020, and this is a video about libertarians. This is not really a video I want to make, but I had the idea a while back to do a video on this topic, and just a few days ago, I did a video called Voting Socialist in 2020. It was a rundown between the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Green Party. And what I found in that video was that those two parties had almost identical platforms. While PSL is explicitly a Marxist-Leninist party and the Green Party is recently calling itself eco-socialist, I think that there is a place for socialists in both parties. I think that they are calling for the same things. I think that a, socialist coalition can include people from both parties. And I think that basically my strategy would be vote Green in 2020 because they're on the ballot everywhere and are likely to get a bigger percentage, while trying to build parties like PSL and others. Now, one thing we should not do is support libertarians under any circumstances. Libertarians should be treated with exactly the same derision and scorn, maybe more, than we give to Democrats and Republicans. Libertarians are the worst. They are neoliberals. I mean, for anyone opposed to neoliberalism, meaning neo, a new, return to classical liberalism, well, that's exactly what libertarians are. Brief recap, in the late 19th century, we had laissez-faire, or let happen, free market capitalism. That was capitalism where you just let the capitalists do what they want. Very minimal to no restriction or regulation, and very little protection for workers. And then in the early 20th century, we started to get some regulation and reform, which led to social democracy from about, the 30s to, the 70s or so. And then we get neoliberalism coming in the 70s into the 80s for sure under Reagan, which is basically a big social counter-revolution to undo the New Deal, the Great Society programs, and all the kinds of workers' rights that were won as concessions that the capitalists were throwing to us out of fear that, we might have a socialist revolution like Russia had. They were like, here, have some minimum wage, have some this. We want to keep capitalism running efficiently and smoothly. And actually, if you read something like the NLRA, the National Labor Rights Act, passed, I believe, in 35, that created the National Labor Relations Board, which created standards for negotiations between labor unions and capitalists. It says right in maybe the preamble even, that it's like stubborn capitalists are threatening the entire system by their refusal to deal with unions. And basically they were like, we don't want a revolution. We just want capitalism to run more smoothly. We can afford to throw them a bone. Let's throw them a bone. But then at some point, the capitalist class decided, the more conservative wing of the capitalist class gained sway, and they said, fuck it. Let's just have a full frontal assault on all of these rights and on socialism. And, they did help to sabotage and destroy at least the Soviet Union, if not China and other countries, socialist countries. And they concurrently and definitely since have dramatically weakened social protections and concessions to workers, to where 40 years now since 1980 Ronald Reagan's election, there's almost nothing left. I mean, there's very, very little of what we started out with, some 80 or so, 90 years ago with the beginnings of the New Deal. So libertarians couldn't be happier about a return to that. What you hear, though, from progressives sometimes, including some people in the Green Party, unfortunately, is that a progressive libertarian coalition is possible on some issues. Well, no, it isn't. And not only do libertarians stand for hyper-capitalist, crypto-fascist type society and those kinds of policies, they're against everything meaningful that we stand for, whether it's money in politics, worker rights, privatization. They're all for privatization. They want private prisons. They want to privatize it all, baby. If somebody's not profiting, some private capitalist isn't profiting off of it, they're not interested. And there's an earlier version of this video in which I actually attempted, in the same manner as I did with the Green Party and PSL, to like run down some of the libertarian platform. And I just couldn't do it. It was wrong-headed and naive at best and misleading at worst. I'll take an important example. Libertarians have a nominal opposition to war and empire, and also the conspiracies, false flag terrorism, whatever, that is sometimes used to create a social pretext for these wars. Except that the system that they espouse, capitalism, and let alone free market capitalism, like completely unregulated capitalism, requires empire. And so there's this massive disconnect where you have these libertarians who don't really have power per se, saying evil government, evil government. Well, first of all, who does the government work for? The government works for capitalists. That's who runs the government. So you want to say evil government? Look at the capitalist class. But they say, well, just, you know, government as an institution, whether it's the working class or the capitalist class, nobody should have that much power. Well, guess what, though? The government doesn't start wars because they're bad people, because they had a bad childhood, because they're sexually repressed, whatever. They don't start wars for personal resources. They didn't go into Iraq to control the oil and geopolitics of that region, which is strategically important, because they're bad or greedy people. They did it because their system requires that they do it. The entire system will fall apart. Now, you could say the system is based on greed. Certainly, we could have a different system. Capitalism is a couple of centuries past its sell-by date, in my opinion, that I think is an evidence-based opinion and backed up by fact. It keeps collapsing every 10 years. But libertarians basically have a contradictory worldview. They say that they are against war and they're against government intrusion. The economic system that they espouse literally cannot exist without these violations that they claim to be against. You know, all this life, liberty, property stuff that you see all over libertarian stuff, it's basically, you know, recycled from the bourgeois revolutions of the late 18th century. I mean, not exactly cutting edge, but even then, people just made that stuff up, and it was shown almost immediately in the early 1800s that even those people couldn't hold true to it. And it wasn't that they got corrupt, it was that they had these ideals, and then the economics demanded a different set of behavior from the ruling class. Capitalism is not a popular system. It does not empower the vast majority of people. It disempowers most people, okay? This thing that libertarians are all about at their core, private property. Industry should not be treated as private property. You know what should be private property? Maybe your house, your personal possessions, you know, your record collection or whatever, you know, like that kind of stuff, your clothing, your toothbrush, that's private personal property. There is a whole other class of things, social property, that currently is privately owned under capitalism and should not be, because it's not worked for and earned by individuals. It is worked for, built, and produced by collective groups of people, whether that's 50 employees in a factory, whether it's, you know, 100 people all working for the same, you know, bus company, whatever. Those are the people who actually produce the goods and services. It's their wealth that they made that paid the bills on whatever workplace they're in, using whatever equipment that they're using to make that industry go. And the fact that libertarians are all about letting one or two capitalists control each workplace, or a small group of capitalists, or in the largest workplaces, you know, stockholders on the open market, controlling that workplace rather than the workers, is insanity. It's just insanity. Maybe this was a step up over the old system of like feudalism and monarchical control, of like a feudal nobility controlling things. Yeah, okay, capitalism was a step up over that. But we're talking about 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. We're in a different world now. We're in a different world. And the libertarian worldview, it doesn't hold up. Capitalism doesn't hold up. So they go out there as vehement defenders of private property and of capitalism in an age where capitalism is collapsing. And they always just want to blame the government somehow. Oh, there was too much regulation, or there's too much cronyism, there's too much favoritism. Like, wake the fuck up. When you have a society, a capitalist society, where capitalists have all the power and all the wealth, they're necessarily going to control and buy anything that they can buy, including politicians. And we know from the Princeton study that in an election in the United States, any given election, the person who spends the most money is 95% likely to win that election, meaning elections are bought. And once people get into power, public policy does not statistically correlate with public opinion. It does, however, public policy does correlate with donor opinion, or in other words, the capitalist class opinion. That's why we call the capitalists the ruling class. Whether they're in government or not, they rule. And this is, again, the myopic libertarian government is the enemy worldview. It's not just, government is one institution in society, okay? Churches and other, religious bodies are institutions. Education, schools, those are institutions. Government is an institution. But throughout it all, there's a power structure that transcends any one institution. You can have authority within an institution. And you could have different institutions having different kinds of authority within society. But the ruling class transcends all of that, because if you really look at who rules America or who rules any capitalist country, it's the capitalist class. They're on all the boards of all these different things, whether they're for-profit or non-profit, whether they're public or private. Most of the time, capitalists worm their way into all the stuff because they have the connections and they have the time and they have the resources. So if we really want a society where people have liberty and freedom, we need to do away with private property. Yes, you will no longer have the freedom to exploit other people by putting a tax on them called rent or a tax on them called profit. What is rent? In the case of a house or, apartment, but like something you rent, well, it is a tax that the capitalist puts on the tenant to access that shelter. After a while, all the bills are paid on that structure. Yet the capitalist keeps taking. What is profit? People a lot of times will say profit is the reward for the risk that capitalists take. Well, first of all, we don't need a system where all the risk for a business venture is on one person. That's kind of a crazy system, actually. We could have a system where the risk and the reward was much more evenly distributed over all the people contributing to it, meaning the workers. Then we wouldn't have these radical income and wealth inequalities. But right now, we have about 10% of the population that is petty bourgeoisie, small capitalist. Maybe they own an apartment complex or a small business, all the way up to the big capitalists who, just own like half the stock market or something. I exaggerate, but I mean, people who are like billionaires and own major companies or industries and employ, thousands of people. Those people have power in society. I mean, they can influence and access the government, religious leaders, whatever. The working class is about 90% of people. We don't own anything. We don't have capital. What is capital? Productive property that capitalists use to extract money from other people. So back to the workplace, you're in the working class. You're, let's say, one of 49 employees, and then there's one capitalist, the boss. So there's 50 of you. Let's say even the capitalist works full-time at that business. They're doing 2% of the work, yet they have the legal right to 100% of the surplus. Why? Why do we tolerate that? Well, libertarians are all for it. They're all for it. Yet I have talked to in S4A comments random working class libertarians who are actively going against their class interests. And I said, how much of the profit do you think the workers should be getting? They're like, well, you know, in that exact example where everybody's equally doing 2% of the work, and we'll just say hypothetically they're all doing the same work. And they were like, well, I think that the workers should, you know, probably get 1.8% of the surplus. And then, you know, the capitalist gets maybe, you know, 12%. But realistically, it'd probably be more like 1.5%. I'm like, well, guess what? Right now, the law is workers are entitled to 0%. You're entitled to a wage, which just covers living expenses. It covers your labor and has no relationship to the actual goods or services you produced. So you're just getting paid for your labor time, meaning you're just getting paid enough to like reproduce your labor, basic living expenses, basic food, basic housing, maybe some basic education that is required for you to get up the next day and come back to work and make more money for the capitalist. And why do we do work? Because it's meaningful? I think we could find other things to do with our time in many, many cases than just going and supporting some capitalist's profit venture, making some shit that most people don't need just because they think they might make a profit on it. No, we do it because everything in society is commodified. This is something else we're against as socialists, meaning that housing, food, medical care, education, clothing, etc. are treated as commodities. You have to buy them. You have to pay money for them. So in a society where you need money to buy things, well, where do you get money from? Wages. Okay, so that's why you're there working. So you have to access a workplace. Well, the capitalist who owns the workplace is taxing you. It's called profit. It's a private tax. It's not the government. But the capitalist is setting their tax rate. They pay you whatever wage they feel like paying you, and they keep the rest. We should not tolerate that system. Why is that system allowed in the 21st century? We should not have the system. Yet the Libertarian Party is all about it. Now you get up to a bigger level, and capitalists are in ruthless competition with each other. I mean, yeah, they can agree on a lot. They can agree that they need to ruthlessly exploit and oppress the working class. Otherwise, we will rise up and take industry that we built back from them, and we will end their oppression. So they can agree on that. But amongst themselves, they rise and fall in relative power to each other constantly. They're in ruthless competition. So the profit motive is also a profit mandate. If they're not making as much profit surplus as they possibly can, some other capitalist is going to come along and buy them out, put them out of business, and then they will be sunk into the working class. Gasp, eek, they don't want that. And it's strong motivation for them to up their exploitation game and to hang in there as a capitalist, which makes conditions worse for us. Why? Because the interests of the capitalist and the working class are diametrically opposed. You want more of the whole value of your labor. You want more of the value of the goods and services that you produce. And the capitalist wants the exact same thing. So you're just in a tug of war over, you are going there producing goods and services, saying, give me that, I made that. And the capitalist is saying, my workplace, I'm taxing you. And they'll do it as much as they possibly can. Libertarians represent the capitalist class. Republicans also represent the capitalist class. They just have slightly different rhetoric about it and slightly different approaches to hoodwinking working class people into voting for them and supporting them and wearing their stupid fucking MAGA hats, etc. Democrats also represent the capitalist class while pretending to represent workers. We need to reject all of that. So the best things that libertarians say to you, they're at best naive, false promises and misleading lies. They depend on your ignorance. They depend on your gullibility. So let's take like a super brief look. I didn't know if I was going to do this, but let's take a super brief look at Jo Jorgensen, the current candidate for president for the Libertarian Party. Here's her view on Social Security. Quote, I would work to implement a solution like Cato Institute's 6.2% solution. Cato Institute is a far-right free market think tank. Do you trust politicians to keep their promises? I don't. They've spent every cent in the Social Security Trust Fund on other spending, leaving behind worthless IOUs. Other countries have successfully replaced their government-run systems with individual retirement accounts safe from greedy politicians. As president, I would work to implement a solution like the Cato Institute's 6.2% solution, which would allow any American the opportunity to opt out of the current system while making the current system fiscally stable for those who choose to remain. Okay, there's so many lies in here, or just, again, distortions, false representations. The 6% solution is basically a way to, like, mandate people to create like a private retirement account in the stock market. We know how well the stock market's doing. Remember 2008? And now we're in COVID? I don't know why anyone would support this. Except, oh yeah, businesses don't like Social Security. Why? They have to contribute to it. Also, people who run companies that sell stock to the public and the entire industry of brokers, etc., around them who make commissions on it, would really like to handle your money. And they'd like to invest your money in private companies, not in the Social Security Trust Fund. They want to be able to profit off of your money. That's all this is. That's all it is. So they want you to be able to gamble with your money rather than putting it into Social Security, which is guaranteed by the U.S. government. And they want you to give private companies your money through stocks that you can then gamble on their companies. And of course, private companies, much unlike the greedy politicians, would never fuck you over. As we know, stocks never fucking lose money ever. As we all know. So, and about this other point about greedy politicians spending Social Security on other spending and leaving behind worthless IOUs. Yeah, which politicians exactly did that? Was it ones who, like, maybe opposed the initiation of Social Security in the first place? Kind of like people like this? All right, so that's their plan for Social Security. Privatize it. That's their plan. Actually, if you want to boil down pretty much anything about the Libertarian Party, privatize it is pretty much going to be the correct answer almost all the time. Here's another one. Taxes. Where does JoJo stand on taxes? I bet you can guess. Quote, I will work tirelessly to slash federal spending. Taxes are never voluntary. They are always paid under threat of punishment. If you fail to pay what government says you owe, you can be fined, have your wages garnished, assets seized, even go to prison. Voting for more government spending inevitably leads to higher taxes to pay for it, now or in the future. As president, I will work tirelessly to slash federal spending, make government much, much smaller, and let you keep what you earn. Well, if you're a working person, you probably benefit more from taxes than you pay into them. And actually, when the federal income tax system was initially introduced, it was much more skewed towards taxing capitalists and not taxing workers. It is right-wing reactionaries who have put the tax burden less on big capitalists, and they've pushed it more onto the working class. So that's why, if taxes are unfair, that's why they got unfair. Now, libertarians are like, let's just throw the whole thing away. Hence the memes about, why are you a libertarian? I hate roads. Because they literally just want to cut all federal spending and replace it with private commerce. That would be a nightmare world where you're just giving capitalists who already abuse power even more power. But to libertarians, it's okay because it's not the government. Also here, lest you think that I'm exaggerating, this is from the Libertarian Party platform, Statement of Principles, page 3 of the PDF. Governments throughout history have regularly operated on the opposite principle that the state has the right to dispose of the lives of individuals and the fruits of their labor. Even within the United States, all political parties other than our own grant to government the right to regulate the lives of individuals and seize the fruits of their labor without their consent, unquote. I mean, the part I'm really focusing on is seize the fruits of their labor without their consent. They want to completely abolish taxation entirely. So I don't know. I mean, there's so many people in this country because of capitalism who just would not have anything if it weren't for the public version of whatever it is. And they just want to like crush that. So beyond that, though, I think you can hear in here, first of all, that the state has the right to dispose of the lives of individuals and the fruits of their labor. Like, are you fighting the monarchy? Because I think that this went out hundreds of years ago, and now the actual threat is the very capitalists who your party is set up to defend. Talk about taking the fruits of people's labor. Workers are not paid for the fruits of their labor. Workers are paid just to reproduce themselves from day to day. And what you're paid doesn't have any actual, relationship to what you made. Speaking of the fruits of your labor. And also grant to government the right to regulate the lives of individuals. I mean, that's a bit of a vague statement, but that's also like, yeah, dude, there's rules. Society, we live in one. Let me see if I have anything else here. COVID. What do they have to say about COVID? The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed a tale of two Americas. One of the people who stood ready to solve our problems quickly, and one of federal bureaucrats whose ineptitude severely delayed access to vital testing. The solution is to remove red tape and regulation so that consumers can get treatments and test products as quickly as possible. As we entered the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, federal lawmakers passed the CARES Act, giving away trillions to corporations and special interests and thwarting our long-term recovery. This will cost the average taxpayer much more than they get in short-term cash and will make it harder for small businesses to recover. Well, comment, first of all, like half of the small businesses are not going to reopen, so forget that. Instead, we must get government out of the way so businesses can rebuild as quickly as possible and allow Americans to get back to work. So they just want a complete crash of the entire system, is what I'm hearing here. This is not a solution. Again, their whole thing is let the free market decide. Who is the free market? 75% of the stock market is owned by 1% of the stockholders. That's who the free market is. That's who's deciding when you let the free market decide. How are these people any better than the government? They're not. They're not. Libertarians are selling you a bill of goods. It is a lie. All of these various permutations of capitalism with the state, capitalism with less of a state, they're all fucking capitalism. They're not good. They're not what we want as socialists. Do not work with these people. Over the last several months, one nation and world have dealt with a crisis unprecedented in our lifetimes, as COVID-19 has infected nearly 23 million people. Here in the United States, the pandemic has revealed a tale of two Americas, the one driven by career politicians in Washington, and the one created by the American people. Wow. When I say that they're counting on your ignorance, that's what I mean. They're counting on you just buying in mindlessly to these kinds of statements. I can't even fucking read this. The American people have risen to the occasion. Essential workers have delivered necessary goods and services. Yeah, why? Only because they don't qualify for unemployment. Fucking no one wanted to do that. They're sacrificial workers. And neighbors have looked after one another to make sure they remain safe. Not exactly, but unfortunately, the federal government cannot say the same. In what has too often... Anyway, I really can't read this. It's just, if you're at this point in the video, just literally flush the Libertarian Party down the toilet. It's just, all they want to do is privatize everything, scapegoat the government for every problem, and ignore the systemic global effects of capitalism. They don't mind inequality. They think it's just part of the system. They don't mind that capitalism crashes every 10 years. They call it market corrections. And yeah, people's lives get destroyed, but hey, capitalism keeps rolling on. Except it doesn't keep rolling on, not the same way that it went in. Capital gets more and more consolidated. And at this point, just go read Marx, because Marx will tell you how capital behaves, where capitalism is headed, etc. Libertarians are selling to the petty bourgeoisie, people who have a little bit of money, a little bit of capital, and they think that they can get rich. That is who the Libertarian Party is appealing to. That is essentially fascism. It's a rebellion of the petty bourgeoisie who want to turn back the wheel of history. They want to get big too. They resent the big capitalists. They want to get rich, and they will buy any kind of nonsense that the big capitalists, who actually are behind all of this rhetoric and all of this privatization nonsense, they're getting the petty bourgeoisie to get fanatical about paving the way for just, totally unfettered capitalism. And fettered capitalism, not better. It's not really any more sustainable. But they can't even deal with that. I mean, even under fettered so-called capitalism, you still get a consolidation of capital, immiseration, alienation, exploitation. You still get all of that. Because workers aren't getting the full value of our labor. Because we don't control production democratically. Because you go to work and you're just told what to do in an authoritarian manner most of the day, unless you're a, quote, professional, in which case you're maybe only told what to do half or, 3/4 of the day. We need to take this whole system and throw it away. We need socialism, not capitalism. And it's going to take a while. We managed to have a successful socialist revolution. That is the beginning of building socialism, not the end. So, we got to get started on that. But people like the Libertarian Party, all they do is stand in the way of progress. All they do is stand in the way of progress. And the few things that they seem to align with progressives on are nominal only. They are rhetoric only. It is a cure worse than the disease. They will come in and say, oh, you can have civil rights. And some people who are not Marxists, who are not really grounded in socialism, will be like, well, that sounds like a little bit of an improvement. Nope, because the rest of what they do is going to make the overall system much worse. Okay, so let's take one last look here at a concrete policy position of Joe Jorgensen before moving on. And also, by the way, on the COVID thing, note that there was no discussion of single payer, anything like that. They're completely opposed to it. They want private for-profit healthcare all the way. That is the libertarian way. But I think, if none of the previous things got through to you, here's their position on poverty in general. Quote, the cure for poverty is a vibrant economy, aka privatize it. Quote, from 1959 to 1969, the poverty rate was nearly cut in half, while government did little to address poverty. However, after the war on poverty was fully implemented in the early 70s, progress stopped. 50 years of federal anti-poverty programs, zero impact. No, that is an outright lie. Well, like I said, they count on your ignorance. They depend on you not knowing your own history of the working class, of the class you belong to. And that is how they try to slip these things in. I'm not even halfway through, but let's look at this. From 1959 to 1969, the poverty rate was nearly cut in half. Why is that? It's a combination of the golden age of social democracy. We had the most social programs ever. 2, the United States had just won World War II. The U.S. economy was booming because Europe was still piecing itself back together after World War II. Union membership was still at its peak in the United States. That was another. Unions, labor unions are one of the main bulwarks against poverty in any capitalist country. Being a member of a labor union, you're more likely to have more rights at work, better pay, control over conditions, etc. And 1960 was like the peak year. But throughout the 60s, although it started to decline, it was still like up around 25-30% of the private sector was unionized. And that had a positive effect because on the non-unionized sector, because they had to compete with the unionized sector. And capitalists tried to keep unions out of their workplace by just offering them union-type benefits in the first place. And then, they could tell the workers, oh, you don't need to organize. Now, workers shouldn't have believed that because we always need more power at work, always. Capitalists are members of the Chamber of Commerce and other capital-type support organizations. Workers need a union too. Join a union, any union. I mean, there's a lot of crap unions out there, what the IWW called business unions, that are really in it for their own paycheck. You still get better representation. It's not ideal, but it is better. okay, than trying to hack it on your own, which is the entire individualized vision that libertarians have for you. So then they go on, however, after the war on poverty was fully implemented in the early 70s, progress stopped. Yeah, not coincidentally, that was the start of neoliberalism. It was just starting to get a foothold, but that was the start. 50 years of federal anti-poverty programs, zero impact, is a complete fucking lie. That is completely false. Completely false. I don't know how many tens, hundreds of millions of people's lives were improved by the socialist and social democratic coalition that achieved improvements in people's lives that people like these loathsome fucking bottom feeder libertarians would have opposed. And back in those days, if you came out with this kind of bullshit in public, you would have been shredded. You would have been beaten down as a Nazi for advocating what they're advocating back then. Now, after Reagan and everything, the fucking me generation, the boomers, they really dropped the ball and standards slipped badly. Union membership. I mean, Reagan, definitely had a huge assault on unions, and the unions, concessionist as they were, went right along for that slide down to the bottom. But anyway, this shit would not have flown back then. Continuing, government anti-poverty programs don't work. Again, that's a fucking lie. Notice also throughout all of this, there's no evidence for anything. There's no evidence for any of it. They just say it and they expect you to believe it. It's bullshit. The real cure for poverty is a vibrant economy that generates plentiful jobs and high wages. Well, what do you think? Leave a comment. What do you think? Do you think that just creates a good standard of living for everyone? Or do you get a race to the bottom where people are being paid $8 to $12 an hour to waste their lives in some big company where they're treated like a number and to have student debt till the end of their life and, have a mortgage they never pay off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or medical debt or whatever. Notice, yeah, they're not going to do anything about debt. They work for the fucking creditors, this party. They work for capital. Combined with an affordable cost of living. Yeah, okay. I'm making the, the universal jerk-off motion here. That's complete nonsense. It's an utter lie, what they're saying here. They're not going to do a damn thing for an affordable cost of living for you. That would involve regulation, the cardinal sin to a libertarian. As president, I will work to eliminate policies that cripple economic growth. Like what? Like what is, it's just, I'm dumbfounded. There's like no fucking taxes as it is. What are you even talking about? I will give special attention to regulations driving up the cost of housing and healthcare. Like what? Like what is driving up the cost of housing? Like having building codes? What are you talking about? And healthcare. It's not regulations that are driving up the cost of healthcare. It's private for-profit insurance coupled with a medical supply system, which is just a mafia, is all it is. Private industry. That's not fucking regulations. Wow. But see, again, they don't cite any evidence for this. So if you didn't know anything at all, you might find this persuasive. I do. And you do, probably, if you're listening to this. And if you don't, I hope that you stick with us and learn more over subsequent broadcasts and the earlier ones. I will give special attention to regulations driving up the cost of housing and healthcare, as well as those creating barriers to creating new businesses or entering professions. Guess what? I've owned a business. It's not hard. The real barrier is just getting capital. It's just getting the startup money. Like, you either save up for it, and it's hard to save up because most people live paycheck to paycheck, so we're not paid enough. Or somebody in your family gives you the money, which, again, that's birth lottery. Or you get really lucky. Most small businesses fail also. But this whole thing about barriers to creating new businesses, it's a joke. It's complete nonsense. Also, when they talk about barriers, they're talking about the minimum wage and stuff like that. This party, last I checked, was completely against the minimum wage. Do you want to live in that world? Because I don't. So for progressives saying we can work with these people, fucking forget it. Because for whatever two minor issues you're going to agree with them on, they're going to be undermining everything you stand for in every other way. Finally, to creating new businesses or entering professions. Great, deregulate the professions. I mean, who doesn't want that? And by the way, it's not really the government in a lot of cases regulating the professions. It's professional societies who are privately trying to keep a tight hold on issuing licenses and things like that so that they keep their labor pool small and they can keep prices, unjustifiably high. Finally, I will work to repeal laws and regulations that prevent individuals and charitable organizations from helping those in need. Like, what does that even mean? Is this more faith-based initiatives? Anyway, don't trust these people any further than you can throw them. Literally, they're saying the cure for poverty is more capitalism. Fuck you. That's my response. Anyway, what are your questions? Because I could go on for a long time. Libertarians can be persuasive to relatively apolitical people. They appeal to general vague sense of nationalism and patriotism, which to some extent I think is almost biological. I mean, people just, want to take care of their neighbors and community and their land, however you define it. They appeal to all of the kind of, Pledge of Allegiance, Declaration of Independence, indoctrination that we got in school. They appeal to all that stuff. They're not really threatening they're not threatening at all to the capitalist class. They're not internationalist, really. I mean, they're nationalist for the people. They're internationalist for capital. They oppose any kind of trade barrier whatsoever. They want to completely destroy national sovereignty in favor of just global sovereignty, naked global sovereignty of capital. They want if you've ever seen those free trade zones that they set up in third world countries and in vulnerable countries that are not part of the imperialist world order, where they literally set up a free trade zone where they forgive part of the country's debt in exchange for setting up 10 square miles where there's no laws. And then people have to work in absolutely horrible, life-threatening conditions in those free trade zones. Well, libertarians want to make the entire planet a free trade zone. So if you're a working person and that sounds good to you, there's something wrong with your ideology. You need to get educated because it is not in your class interest when you could have a better life, when you could have more of the full value of your labor, when you can have economic rights, when you can have the ability to develop and educate and build yourself into a full person under socialism. And you would opt to squander your life in a sweatshop, die young, making a capitalist even richer and solidifying capitalist control over the world economy, over your offspring, over your brethren, your fellow citizens and neighbors, and etc., your fellow workers across the whole world. You're either a working person who really needs to get educated, or you're a capitalist and you're going to benefit. And we also know, if this sounds like a psychotic system, it is. We know that capitalists, there have been studies that capitalists, wealthy people in general who tend to be capitalists, have decreased ability to accurately read other people's emotions and to feel empathy for other people. So literally, the richer you get, the more out of touch you get, you are more and more of a psychopath. You lose connection with the reality of other people's feelings and lives. We as socialists are fighting for humanity. Libertarians go out there with all this rhetoric about liberty and life and property, and then they want a system that systematically undermines all of those things and reduces you to less of yourself and allows capitalists to tax you privately through profit, through rent, whatever it is. They're parasites. We don't need them. We can build socialism. We can build a world without them. We can build a world without their exploitation. We can build a world without their oppression. We have to get organized, and we can do it. It has been done before in various countries. We can do it. So I'm going to wrap up this video now. I had intended originally, you know, as I believe I mentioned, to read the Libertarian Party platform. I just couldn't. I just couldn't. I'll put a link to it if you want to read it. It's a bunch of hot air and misrepresentations. Yeah, you know, libertarians, come at me. You think you can make your point? I challenge you to make your point. You really can't. And I don't think that this party you're supporting is what you think it is. I think that you're looking for a change from the status quo. And I think you've picked something that somehow is worse than the status quo, which is what libertarians are. I wish that I could have broken it down more like I did, you know, the Howie Hawkins platform or of the Greens or of PSL. But those are positive social changes. Peace and freedom, Green Party, those are positive steps in the right direction. Even Bernie Sanders, who's terrible on foreign policy, his co-opted, slightly watered down version of the Green New Deal, that was a step up. This libertarianism is actually a step down. I didn't think it was possible, but it is a step down. It would unleash a nightmare world of high-tech, hyper-capitalist fascism. That's what it would be. But a big part of fascism is willful ignorance, so getting through to libertarians can be challenging. I'm going to leave it there. There's no real there's no real happy ending here, except that we can beat them. But right now, libertarians do pull ahead of any socialist party, and we've got to change that. You know, that can be a limited goal along the way of overtaking the duopoly. But libertarians need to be vocally and vociferously attacked anytime that they show their faces. And they were on the internet in numbers before the left was. Unfortunately, they got about 10 years on us on internet organizing. I think that they are being exposed more and more as the capitalist shills and frauds, enemies of the working class that they are. But we need to keep this up. All right, and with that, thanks to our current patrons, whose names are on the screen. You can support us at patreon.com/socialismforall. I put as much time as I can into this channel. Of course, the more I get paid, the more time I can spend on it. Just, not independently wealthy. So, yeah, all of the contributions are helpful, but the more actual money I get does translate into time I can put into this. You can also follow us at facebook.com/socialismforall for nice shit posts and memes and community and conversation. We have a few groups there now. And then please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the notification bell on this video. We grew about 200 subscribers in the past week, so little applause there. I'm happy to see this community growing. Please take these videos that you like, share them in your Facebook groups and your Discord servers and your Reddit communities, and you'll help to build socialism for all. Thanks for listening.